The cold wind howled through the nearly empty gas station parking lot as James adjusted the worn-out jacket that barely kept him warm. His fingers, rough from years of hard labor, gripped the fuel pump tightly while he stared at the digital numbers, climbing higher than he could afford. He exhaled slowly, pulling out a few crumpled bills from his pocket, enough to get him just a couple of gallons, barely enough to last through the week. James wasn't one to complain, but life had been hitting him hard. Bills were piling up. His construction job had cut his hours, and with a young daughter at home depending on him, every dollar mattered. He had stopped believing in miracles a long time ago. Just as he was about to put the pump back, the sound of an engine struggling to turn over caught his attention. A few feet away, a sleek black Mercedes sat motionless at one of the pumps, its driver clearly frustrated. As she turned the key again and again, James could see the faint glow of the woman's phone screen as she hesitated, probably debating whether to call for roadside assistance. Something inside him wouldn't let him ignore it. Maybe it was habit. Or maybe he just knew what it felt like to be stuck with no one around to help. He approached the car carefully, not wanting to startle her. "Hey, need a hand?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. The woman turned toward him, her sharp eyes scanning him cautiously. She was dressed in an elegant coat, her nails perfectly manicured, and even in the dim station lights, there was something about her presence that felt different. She didn't look like the kind of person who found herself stranded often. "I don't know what's wrong. It just won't start," she said, frustration laced in her tone. James nodded, stepping closer. "Mind if I take a look?" Hesitated for a second before giving a small nod. He popped the hood and leaned over, scanning the engine with the trained eye of a man who had fixed more broken things than he could count. Cars, roofs, appliances, even his own life, though that one never quite seemed to stay fixed. After a few minutes of checking wires and testing connections, he wiped his hands on his jeans. "It's probably your battery. Might just need a jump." She let out a breath of relief. "I was about to call someone, but if you can help, I'd really appreciate it." James gave a small, tired smile. "No problem. Got jumper cables in my truck." As he walked back to his old pickup, he felt a familiar pang in his chest. He had been on the other side of this too many times, needing help and hoping someone would notice. It felt good to be the one offering help for once, even if it was just a quick fix. Within minutes, he had her car running again. The woman let out a surprised laugh, clearly relieved. "You just saved my night. Thank you." James shrugged. "It's what people do, right?" She glanced at him, as if seeing him differently now. "Not everyone." James didn't think much of her words. He was already preparing to leave when she pulled something from her purse. A crisp $100 bill. "Here, take this. It's the least I can do," she said, holding it out to him. James shook his head immediately. "No, really you don't have to do that. I was just helping." She frowned. "Are you sure?" "Yeah," he said, stepping back. "Just drive safe." The woman studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "What's your name?" "James." "Well, James," she said, tucking the bill back into her purse. "I don't forget people like you." With that, she got into her car and drove off, leaving James standing there, watching the taillights disappear into the night. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have known, was that this wasn't just any woman, and the small act of kindness he had just shown. It was about to change his life in ways he never imagined. James drove home in silence, the old truck rattling slightly over every bump in the road. His mind wandered back to the woman at the gas station. There was something about the way she looked at him before she left, like she was studying him, like she saw something in him that he couldn't see himself. But he pushed the thought away. It wasn't like he'd ever see her again. By the time he pulled into the small driveway of his worn-down house, exhaustion weighed heavily on him. The single porch light flickered as he stepped out, and the familiar creak of the front door reminded him just how much this place needed repairs. Repairs he couldn't afford. Inside, the warmth of home greeted him, though it was modest at best. "Daddy!" a small voice called out. His 5-year-old daughter, Lily, ran toward him, wrapping her tiny arms around his legs. She had his same deep brown eyes, full of a kind of joy he had forgotten how to feel himself. "Hey, princess," James said, lifting her up with a tired smile. "You been good for Grandma. She made me pancakes." Lily grinned, pointing toward the kitchen where James's mother stood, drying her hands with an old towel. "You're home late," his mother said softly, concern in her voice. She was a strong woman, had been ever since James's father walked out when he was a kid. Now, she helped him with Lily when he worked late, but he could see the worry in her eyes. She knew he was struggling. "Yeah, had to help someone with their car," he said, setting Lily down. "Just one of those nights." His mother gave him a knowing look, but didn't press further. Instead, she simply said, "You should eat something." James wasn't sure how much food they had left in the fridge, but he nodded anyway. He had more immediate worries, like the overdue electricity bill, sitting on the counter. Meanwhile, across town, the woman from the gas station, her name was Rebecca, sat in her penthouse apartment, staring at the city lights through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The world outside looked so different from the one James lived in. She had spent years building her success, overcoming obstacles that most people didn't even know about. But tonight, her mind wasn't on business deals or stock reports. It was on the man who had refused to take her money. Rebecca had met all kinds of people in her life, some genuine, some only interested in what they could gain from her. But James was different. There was something raw and real about him. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He wasn't expecting anything in return. He was just good. The next morning, James woke up before the sun, slipping quietly out of bed. To avoid waking Lily, he had another long day ahead of him at the construction site. Work had been slow, and the hours weren't enough to cover everything. But it was all he had. At the site, he wiped sweat from his forehead as he moved heavy materials, his muscles aching with every lift. The guys around him cracked jokes, complaining about the heat, about their pay, about life in general, but James barely spoke. His mind was too clouded with worries. Then, in the middle of his shift, something unexpected happened. A sleek black car pulled up near the entrance of the site, its polished exterior completely out of place against the dusty backdrop. At first, no one paid much attention. Wealthy people sometimes passed by, but they never stopped. Except this one did. James glanced up just as Rebecca stepped out, dressed in business casual, but looking completely out of place among the hard hats and steel beams. A few of his co-workers nudged each other, whispering, probably wondering who she was. James frowned, wiping his hands on his jeans as she walked toward him. "Rebecca," he said, confused. Her lips curved into a small smile. "You remember my name?" Yeah, of course," James said, still trying to process why she was here. "Everything okay?" She glanced around before saying, "Can we talk?" James hesitated. He didn't know what this was about, but something in her tone made it seem important. He nodded, leading her a few steps away from the noise of the site. Rebecca took a breath. "I didn't get the chance to thank you properly last night." James raised an eyebrow. "You already did." She shook her head. "No, I mean really thank you." She paused, choosing her words carefully. You helped me without expecting anything. And that's rare. I respect that. James shifted on his feet, feeling out of place in this conversation. I don't know. Just seemed like the right thing to do. She studied him again, the same way she had at the gas station. What if I told you I had an opportunity for you? Something that could change things? James frowned. What do you mean? Rebecca took a small step closer. I own a company, a pretty successful one, and I have a project coming up that needs someone reliable, someone hardworking, someone like you. James blinked, unsure if he had heard her right. Wait, are you offering me a job? Yes, she said simply. A good one. Something that pays well. James let out a small, almost disbelieving laugh. You don't even know me. I know enough, Rebecca said firmly. I know that you're a man who doesn't take shortcuts, and that's exactly the kind of person I need. James looked down at his calloused hands, then back at her. It sounded too good to be true. He had been struggling for so long, and now, out of nowhere, this woman, a complete stranger, was offering him a way out. He wanted to say yes. He needed to say yes, but something about it made him hesitate. Rebecca must have noticed because she smiled slightly. You don't have to answer right now, just think about it. She handed him a card with her number on it. Call me when you're ready. With that, she turned and walked back to her car, leaving James standing there, heart pounding, mind racing. He glanced down at the card in his hand, gripping it tightly. For the first time in a long time, he had a real choice. But was it too good to be true? James stood there for a long time, staring at the business card in his hand. The paper felt smooth against his rough fingers, a stark contrast between his world and hers. It didn't feel real. This kind of thing didn't happen to people like him. He had spent years struggling, pushing through life one hard day at a time, and suddenly, a woman he barely knew was offering him an opportunity that could change everything. But could he trust it? That night, after putting Lily to bed, he sat at the kitchen table, the dim overhead light flickering softly. His mother sat across from him, watching as he twirled the card between his fingers. You've been quiet all night, she finally said. James sighed, setting the card down. A woman I helped the other night. She came by the job site today, offered me some kind of work, says it pays well. His mother studied him carefully. And what's stopping you? James leaned back, running a hand through his hair. It just feels unreal. Like, why me? She could hire anyone. Maybe she sees something in you, she said simply. You've spent your whole life helping people, James. Maybe it's finally coming back to you. James didn't know what to say. A part of him wanted to believe that good things could happen, that maybe, for once, life was throwing him a rope instead of another burden. The next day, he dialed the number. Rebecca answered almost immediately, as if she had been expecting his call. James, he exhaled. Tell me more about this job. Within a week, James found himself in a completely different world. Rebecca had hired him as part of a new project, a property development initiative focused on revitalizing struggling communities. It wasn't just a desk job. It was hands-on work, something he understood. He was overseeing labor teams, making sure the construction was done right, helping build homes for people who had been in situations just like his own. The pay, better than anything he'd ever earned before. For the first time in years, he could breathe. Bills were getting paid, Lily had new clothes for school, and the weight on his shoulders didn't feel as crushing. But beyond the financial relief, something else had changed. He felt valued, like his hard work actually mattered. One evening, as he was finishing up at a construction site, Rebecca showed up unexpectedly. She watched him for a moment before walking over. "You look different," she said, smiling. "Lighter, maybe." James chuckled, wiping sweat from his brow. "Well, it's been a long time since I didn't have to choose between groceries and rent." Rebecca nodded, as if she understood completely. "I never told you why I stopped that night. At the gas station." James frowned. "Car trouble." She shook her head. "No. I mean, yes, my car did break down. But I had just come from a board meeting where half the room was telling me that helping lower-income communities was a waste of money, that people wouldn't appreciate it, that they didn't deserve the investment." James clenched his jaw slightly. "That's ridiculous." She smiled. "Yeah. And then I met you. A man who had every reason to keep walking, to ignore a stranger's problem. But you didn't. You stopped. You helped. And you refused to take anything for it." James looked away, feeling strangely embarrassed. "It wasn't a big deal. It was to me," she said softly. "You reminded me why I fight for these projects, why people deserve a chance." He met her gaze then, realizing that this wasn't just about a job offer. It was something bigger. A moment of fate, maybe. Two completely different lives, crossing paths at the right time. Months passed, and James kept climbing. He became an essential part of the team, bringing insights that no one in the corporate offices ever considered. He knew struggle firsthand, and because of that, he helped shape the project into something that truly mattered. One day, as he picked Lily up from school, she held his hand and asked, "Daddy, are we rich now?" James laughed. "Not rich, baby. But we're okay." And for the first time in a long time, that was more than enough. As he drove home, watching the sunset paint the sky in warm hues, he thought about how different his life had become from that night at the gas station. Sometimes, the smallest moments lead to the biggest changes. Sometimes, helping a stranger isn't just an act of kindness. It's the start of something life-changing.